This is the lecture for European history for Thursday, the 11th of November, 2021. This is Veterans Day here in the United States, where we honor those who have lived and died, who chose to serve, or who stepped up when called. After this period, we're going to have a school-wide Veterans Day remembrance event. And this day was chosen originally because it was Armistice Day for World War I. The First World War ended on the Western Front at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918. And up until the Second World War, it was called Armistice Day. Today, because there was another World War, it's Veterans Day. You'll get more during the ceremony. Where we are now is the power of the churches has been broken, at least as a force that can aggressively contend with the state. Serve in a volley. The kings, emboldened by this and inspired by what they have learned about the Chinese emperor and the Japanese emperor and their pretensions to total power, try to pursue absolute or total monarchy in Europe. Volley back. Europeans, who are not used to being treated like Asiatics when it comes to government, because of the Judeo-Christian tradition, the focus on the individual, react somewhat unfavorably to this, and a new philosophical movement supported by the mercantile classes is begun, called the Enlightenment, which produces notions like that we have inalienable rights to life, liberty, and property. These Enlightenment ideas come into conflict with the absolute monarchies in two very conspicuous ways. In the 13 colonies of British North America, there is rebellion against their God-appointed lawful king, which produces the United States of America. It is a political revolution. The society before the revolution is largely the same as after the revolution, but the power of London to dictate policy to these former colonies, these now independent states, is broken. We are now an independent republic, and our Constitution is the longest existing written constitution on the earth in terms of still functioning. The English have an unwritten constitution that goes well beyond ours, but it's unwritten. Ours is written, and it's still being used. And it deals with political freedom. Now, that's in the new colonies of America. In France, the Enlightenment ideas combine with a political crisis to produce a social revolution. And in this social revolution, an attempt is made to break feudal society in a way that should be familiar to you if you've paid attention to the Albigensian Crusade or the Hussite Wars or the German peasant uprisings. But this time, in the name of Enlightenment philosophy, the notion of the social contract, that in order to benefit from society, Rousseau writes, an individual must be willing to cede some of their legitimate authority and independence to that society. In France, the attempt to revolutionize society leads to the Great Terror and guillotines operating as if they are on a mass production line, producing death and trauma, the likes of which were not seen anywhere in the American Revolution. This chaos in France, inspired by utopianism, ultimately leads to the dictatorship of one man, the Corsican bandit Napoleon Bonaparte. He is also considered to be one of the greatest generals in human history, along with Alexander the Great. There's nobody else in recorded history of the West, anyway, that comes close to Napoleon. Both of them share many qualities. And Napoleon endeavors to preserve certain aspects of the revolution while building his power to rule in his own fashion, quite absolutely. And he ends up taking control of Europe from Portugal on the Atlantic to Moscow in Russia. Ultimately, Britain holds out against him, Russia holds out against him, In that sense, there's a broad similarity to the Second World War, where Hitler does almost the same thing on the European mainland, but between the Russians and the British and the Americans, the fascists are finally defeated. So, that is the course of this unit, from the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648 to the defeat of Napoleon in the Congress of Vienna in 1815. Let's start. We move from a period of religious war to political war. The 30 Years' War is the aspect of this on the mainland of Europe. In England, there's a protracted series of wars, generally called the English Civil War, which begin as a struggle between an Anglican, pro-Catholic, in certain respects, monarchy, and Puritans, involving and including a man named Oliver Cromwell. And ultimately, these civil wars produce an executed King Charles I. He was beheaded by axe, not by guillotine. Hadn't been invented yet. And the war then really becomes not so much between para-Catholic Anglicans and a pro-Catholic English Queen and Puritans, but between the forces of the English Parliament and the English King. What will happen? Who will rule? And in the end, the parliamentary forces win, they execute the king, and they establish the Commonwealth. The English Commonwealth is a parliamentary government, but it ends up failing due to corruption and to the lack of a strong executive. Oliver Cromwell then seizes power as a military dictator and becomes Lord Protector of England, the scourge of Ireland, and makes a number of political reforms that don't really live beyond his death. His son takes over briefly, but the monarchy is restored by Parliament. So the end of the English Civil Wars ends in a typically English moderation. We're going to see again and again as we go forward that unlike many on the European mainland, the English are willing to come up with compromise solutions and evolutionary solutions, not total victories and revolution. And this will serve England well. So, the 30 Years' War and the English Civil War are both times when this change between a religious orientation to conflict and a political orientation occurs. It's basically in the mid-1600s. On top of the scientific revolution that we talked about with Newton, there is a break with the past in terms of philosophy as well as science. Rene Descartes, to the English speaker it looks like Descartes, but his name is Descartes. Rene Descartes was a first-class physicist. In science class, you will learn about some Cartesian ideas regarding vortices, among other things. But Descartes is also a first-class philosopher and a lousy husband and father. The man has a series of illegitimate children, does not support them. On a personal level, fairly nasty individual. But as a philosopher, Descartes is important as really an opening point to modern philosophy. Modern Western materialistic philosophy, secular philosophy. I hear noise, I should. Okay. Let me take you through one of Descartes' meditations. This is his most famous, and it leads to the quote that is forever associated with him. What if all that we see, taste, smell, feel, or hear is a pretense, an illusion? What if all of our sensory input is a lie? The product of the mind of an evil genius that wants to capture our minds. What if, in fact, we're nothing more than a brain in a jar full of chemicals connected to electrodes? How would we know? Conversely, how do we know that what seems to be real is real? Well, our sensory data is pretty consistent. It's pretty thoroughgoing. I see fire. I hear the sound of crackling. I smell the smell of burning. I approach and I feel warmth. If I stick my hand in it, I feel burning. These are all pretty consistent things. It indicates that there is an objective reality that my senses are perceiving. But the fact remains that a good evil genius, an effective evil genius, an evil genius that's good at being evil, is going to take all of that into account and produce a persistent, self-reinforcing illusion. There's no way, he found, that you can prove that you're not a brain in a jar, receiving a bunch of false sensory data. Now, in this sense, he's sort of ricocheting off of some Buddhist ideas about the universe being a trap for the soul, but being a European materialist rather than an Asian spiritualist, Descartes poses this question: what if I'm a brain in a jar? Not what if I am a soul that the evil forces are trying to trap in this world? That a truly enlightened soul's job is to separate from the world, embrace emptiness, and leave this trap. And if you ever want to see a dramatic and sort of action-packed version of this notion, see the first Matrix movie. It actually does a pretty good job of showing this idea. So, your senses can lie. Aha! What about memory? I remember growing up. I remember playing with my dog. I remember mowing the lawn. I remember acne. I remember the good and the bad and the ugly of my life. I remember what I did. I remember what I learned. I remember little details like the smell of freshly baked apple pie, and big details like the first time I saw a circus at Madison Square Garden in Manhattan. That memory has got to count for something, right? Well, maybe. But an evil genius worth his salt would have certainly programmed you with a bunch of false memories. I could tell a story about anyone or anything. Being a storyteller, I can come up with a character, a motivation, a setting, a dramatic conflict, a resolution, all that stuff. So can you. So what would make it, if an evil genius had the ability to send false sensory data into my brain, wouldn't an evil genius be able to reproduce a bunch of false memories or produce a bunch of false memories and load them in? Can't prove that it's not an evil genius. You cannot prove through the senses of your body or the memories of your mind that you are not a brain in a jar at the mercy of an evil genius. Taking us through this meditation, again and again, what Descartes does is he tries to strip us of the presumption that reality is a self-evidently true thing, that you can take for granted anything. He is introducing a serious existential doubt into every idea he puts forward. How can I prove that I exist? How can I prove that there is a me? How can I prove that I am not a painting on somebody else's canvas, that I am not a brain in somebody else's experiment? And in the end, what Descartes says, famously in Latin, is the only thing I can be certain of, is cogito ergo sum. Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. The only thing that I can prove is that there is a me thinking right now, wondering about these things, wondering about the evil genius, wondering about whether or not I really exist or not. I can't prove anything else except for the present moment of my active mind thinking about these things. So the basis of Cartesian reality, anything of Descartes is Cartesian, is I think, therefore I am, cogito ergo sum. The truth is I should have written it in all caps. Romans did not have lowercase letters. But you get the idea. Now this brings up what is called in philosophy Cartesian dualism. Cartesian dualism. Cartesian dualism. Now, do any of you remember from last year what Persian dualism was? Persian dualism or Zoroastrianism, yeah. Okay, yeah.
I think it's like the belief that like there's good and evil, and then whoever like good will either triumph or evil will either triumph. And,
yeah.
Like
the prophet Zoroaster in ancient Persia wrote in the Avesta, the holy book of Zoroastrianism, that at one point there were two primal forces, each in their own universe. Ahura Mazda or Ormazd, the wise lord, the lord of light. Ahriman or Angramanyu, the dark lord, each in their own realm. And then, for some reason that is unknowable, they both encounter one another. They touch. Like matter and an equal and opposite component of antimatter. Boom! Is the result. That explosive contact between ultimate light and ultimate darkness produces the universe. We are in an ongoing living explosion, according to Zoroastrians. Everything from the solid world to plants and animals to people are all part of this unstable explosion. At some point, human choice, a critical mass of human choice, either for light or for darkness, for good or for evil, will not only determine the fate of your individual soul, but of our shared existence. The universe is teetering on a razor's edge and will either tilt into ultimate darkness or end in heaven on earth, ultimate light. That dualistic idea is of two gods, not one, not many, two, opposite and equal. What some monotheists confuse when they think of Satan as an actual opponent of God. No, Satan is a rebel against God. Satan has no ability to compete with God because he's a creature, not God. But the Persians believe in two equal and opposite gods. In Roman times, the Manichaean philosophy develops, which also says that everything is a choice between white and black, between light and darkness. There is no middle ground. Cartesian dualism is a little bit different. It says that the division of the universe is between mind and body, between mind and body, between mind and body. That mind and body are different, are separate, are related, but ultimately are different realms of experience. That our minds can fly on visions of imagination, but our bodies are stuck here, needing to eat, sleep, eliminate, and everything else that is necessary for process of life to continue. Without the body, the mind is gone. Either goes to heaven or dissipates. Without the body, the mind is no more. And the same is true of without the mind. The body is just a husk, a zombie-like individual. Not an individual at all, actually, just a poor shell of a person. So Cartesian dualism brings us to a point in Western society that says that you can serve your mind or your body. That there is a distinction, a hard, absolute distinction between mind and body. And this is reflected in our society. We're at the Charter Academy. We've got a lot of people that are very good at the mind stuff, but aren't necessarily as good at the athletics or the physical labor side or whatever. We've got some who are, but we have some who aren't. And the notion is you can either be book smarts or street smarts. There's an example of applied Cartesian dualism. The idea that street smarts is visceral and book smarts is intellectual. Cartesian dualism is just a basic assumption that most people in the West have, that the world of mind is somehow removed from the world of body. The ancients understood that they were interlinked, that there is no hard and fast separation between the two. But modern Western philosophy, industrial age philosophy, all posit this hard divide between mind and body, between thought and physicality. And this comes from Descartes' one reality that he says, which is, I think, therefore I am. Thinking is an intellectual process. If he had come to a conclusion, I feel, therefore I am, his philosophy would have meant something utterly different. But because it was thought, rational, conscious thought, the West prizes rational, conscious thought, to the point where its enemies within our society, the woke crowd, actually has said, meritocracy is white supremacy, math is white supremacy, that any form of objective grading is white supremacy, that logic and rationality, that rhetoric and law are all white supremacy, which is a damn racist thing to say, assuming that anyone who isn't white lives in a lawless anarchy without thought, where merit doesn't matter, as if they're in the jungle or something. It's a little racist. But what the anti-Western people within Western civilization are doing is they are conflating rationality with what they call white supremacy. And Descartes would be the beginning of this hyper-rational focus that exists in our Western civilization. By the way, since words mean things, I don't think that white supremacy means what they think it does. Because what they think it does is anything that they disagree with must be white supremacy. Like Virginia electing its first black woman as Attorney General and its first Hispanic, as Lieutenant Governor, and its first Hispanic as Attorney General. Because of white supremacy, because those two happen to be conservative Republicans. You can't be a conservative Republican and avoid white supremacy. You get the idea. It's crazy nuts. Anyway, do any of you have thoughts on this Cartesian dualism, or on the politics, which I brought up, or anything like that before we move on? Yeah.
Can this dualism exist with Christianity?
Descartes was not a really good Catholic Christian. He thought independently. And this is another thing. When people talk about Descartes as the father of secular philosophy, his philosophy had nothing to do, it did not even reference scripture or Christian tradition or Jewish ideas or any of that. It was completely based on things like his meditation. A meditation strictly based in logic, not in any form of cultural or religious tradition. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I was going to just ask what happened to him. Did he just die of old age?
I think he just died of old age. I could be wrong. I am not a specialist on the biography of Rene Descartes. Frankly, I don't like the man very much. But that may have come through in my lecture. But he is brilliant, and his scientific and philosophical ideas are pivotal, and they're worth knowing at least what I
Sam have gone?
Yes, Sam! Head out.
Oh,
Go make mics for us or stuff. And Sam, if you can think of a way to record what we're doing today, I'd love that. It just occurred to me, so I'm sorry I gave you no warning, but if there's a way to even on the phone, what we can do as a school is put it on Facebook.
Okay. Yeah, and I'll borrow this one. Send that along.
Thank you.
Sir?
Okay.
Hey, I'm required. Do I
No.
It's men's choir.
No. Hey.
I'm speaker.
You're not a man. Despite the fluid identification of people in 2021, no. We're not in men's choir.
I mean, I'm in men's choir, so
Okay, moving on. So, medieval kingship, as it evolved, is different from what is going to be called absolute monarchy. Let's get a definition of absolute monarchy first. Absolute monarchy is the belief that the king is the brain and society is the body. That the king should be the only decision maker in the nation, the only important decision maker. Therefore, the only important decisions that are to be made should be made by the king and not by anyone else. absolute in this case means total. Now, Shakespeare once wrote that absolute power corrupts absolutely. In other words, total power totally corrupts. There's a scene in The Fellowship of the Ring, Tolkien's first book of the Lord of the Rings. The whole point of the Lord of the Rings is that the One Ring, the Ring of Power, is created by the Dark Lord to control other rings of power, taint them, and rule them. In order to make this ring so powerful, the Dark Lord actually placed a good part of his soul's energy into the ring. The ring is lost by the Dark Lord. The Dark Lord loses that particular war, but remains around. And the ring is eventually found by very common everyday people, little Englishmen called hobbits. And a hobbit agrees to take the ring to destroy it. In destroying it, the Dark Lord would also be destroyed. And he places himself at great risk to do so because the Dark Lord is coming back, he's reviving, and he wants the ring. With the ring, he'll be unstoppable. Now, this ring has the power to tempt you with whatever you want, because it has the power to grant you, basically, your wishes desired, if you're strong enough of will. So the little hobbit, Frodo, who carries the ring, is not a very ambitious or imaginative person. He's simply decent. And he decides that maybe the wise wizard Gandalf should have the ring. And he offers it to Gandalf. And Gandalf, oh, no, I don't want the ring. Frodo's not going to do much with the ring. He'll become invisible from time to time. Gandalf could use the ring to become a new lord. And then, Frodo, on his way to destroy the ring, goes to the elvish woodland of Lothlorien. And there he encounters an ancient elvish queen named Galadriel. When she shows him a vision of the possible future, Frodo says, well, you're wise. Maybe you should have the ring. And she says, in so many words, you offer me the ring. I don't deny I've thought of this. What wonders I could do with the ring. But ultimately, you would replace a Dark Lord with a queen, beautiful and terrible and fair. All will love me and despair. And she ultimately rejects the temptation. Absolute power, the ability to do anything, including decide who lives and who dies. Absolute power, Shakespeare argues, will corrupt anyone. You could have a saintly person. You could have Mother Teresa, Gandhi, and anyone else that you happen to think is a saintly person. By the way, Gandhi was not. He was a lawyer. But an interesting lawyer, and a lawyer who did some amazing things. But he was a lawyer. And if you know lawyers, you know they're very human. But you give almost anyone power, real power. And sooner or later, they'll forget who they were. They'll forget the restraints. They'll forget that they need to keep a rein on their own id, the monsters within their own selves. Because they'll have no reason to keep control, because they're totally powerful. Shakespeare argues that nobody can resist total power. But it's that exact thing that the kings of Europe are finally going for. Total power. I guess I'll leave it there. So I talked a little about absolute power, but I didn't talk much about medieval kingship. I'll do that next time. And tomorrow you have a workday with a substitute teacher. Do not expect to have computers. You won't. You have access to all the books in this classroom, but none of them can leave. None of them can leave. And your case study 50 fact sheet is due Monday. So make sure that you use tomorrow well. Yes?
Pause or yes?
Yes.
Do you have any books on the Black Death?
You can look around. There are certainly books that talk about the Black Death. They would be behind Mr. Suslov, if I did, because they'd be late medieval. But they're not strictly about the Black Death. They'd be about the late Middle Ages. Thank you. Have a good day.